If you are listening from somewhere quiet tonight, drop a comment telling me where you are in the world. And if this is your first time here, welcome, subscribe and stay. The nights are long and there is so much to explore. Rest now, because 2,000 years ago, in the dust of the Peruvian desert, someone drew a hummingbird the size of a football field. And no one knows who it was for. Feel the weight of your own body right now. The mattress or the chair or the floor beneath you. Feel the way gravity holds you down, quietly, insistently, the way it has held every human body that has ever existed onto this turning earth. Now imagine lying in a desert. Not sand, but pale gravel, flat, baked, so dry that it has not rained here meaningfully in decades. The stones beneath you are warm, even after dark, holding the heat of a sun that has been cooking this plateau for millions of years. The sky above you is enormous. There are no trees here, no hills to interrupt the horizon, just a vast flat plain, roughly the size of the island of Manhattan, stretching out in every direction under a ceiling of stars so thick you can almost hear them. This is the Nazca Plateau in southern Peru. And etched into its surface, beneath your body, beneath the gravel where you lie, are lines. Lines that run perfectly straight for miles. Lines that curve into spirals and animals and figures so large that you would not know you were looking at a bird until you were 500 feet above it. That is the mystery. That is where we begin tonight. Here is the strange thing. The Nazca Lines were drawn between roughly 2,000 years ago and 1,500 years ago, give or take. The people who made them had no written language. They had no wheeled vehicles. They had no draft animals large enough to carry a rider. They had no surveying instruments beyond a stick in the ground and a length of cord. And they had absolutely no aircraft. Not a glider. Not a hot air balloon. Not a kite large enough to carry a human body. Nothing. And yet, they drew a condor with a wingspan of 440 feet. 440 feet. To put that in terms your body might understand, if you stood at the condor and a pose S left wingtip and began walking at a normal pace, it would take you roughly 90 seconds to reach the right wingtip. And you would not know during any of that walk that you were crossing a wing. You would just see shallow lines in pale gravel. The image only resolves when you rise, when you gain altitude, when you see from above. So here is the question, the one that has haunted researchers and dreamers and wanderers since a Peruvian archaeologist named Toribio Mejia Zesp first stumbled upon these lines on foot in 1927 and could not make sense of what he was seeing. Who were these images for? If no one on the ground could see them, and no technology existed to lift anyone above the ground, then what was the purpose? What were they drawing, and why? The air here is still. The gravel makes no sound. The lines simply sit there, waiting. Stay with me tonight, whether your eyes grow heavy or you find yourself drawn further in. Others are listening right now, in the dark, in different cities, under different skies, and you are in good company. This is a long story. It has time. So do you. The plateau is called the Pampa Colorado, the colored plain. Its color is a dull reddish brown, the color of old rust, the color of dried earth, the color of a wound that healed long ago. The surface is made of small wind-worn stones, coated over thousands of years, in a thin dark patina called desert varnish. Desert varnish is one of geology and a pose's quieter wonders. It forms when mineral dust, manganese, iron oxides, settles on exposed rock surfaces and is slowly cemented by microorganisms, bacteria and fungi working across centuries, coating each stone in a dark, thin skin, the way age coats a face. When the ancient Nazca people scratched away this dark surface layer, what was underneath was pale, almost white. And in a desert with almost no rainfall, almost no wind strong enough to carry heavy gravel, and almost no vegetation to disturb the ground, those pale lines stayed pale. For 2,000 years. The desert preserved them, the way dry cold preserves a body, not out of care, but out of indifference. The Nazca people appear to have begun creating the lines, sometime around 100 BCE. That is roughly the same time that Julius Caesar was a child in Rome. That is the same era when the Han dynasty was consolidating power across what is now China. The world was alive with civilizations, building roads, fighting wars, writing philosophy, and here in a dry basin between the Andes and the Pacific, a relatively small culture was drawing pictures into the earth that no living eye could fully appreciate. The Nazca culture was not a great empire. They did not build pyramids in the Egyptian sense. They did not field armies that carved continents. They were farmers, craftspeople, weavers, priests. They lived in small settlements along the river valleys that cut down from the Andes through this bone-dry plateau and toward the sea. Water was everything here. The entire region is one of the driest places on Earth. Rain could go unmeasured for years at a stretch. The rivers that fed the valley ran deep underground, hidden beneath gravel beds, invisible from above, detectable only by the thin green lines of vegetation that marked their hidden paths. The Nazca built elaborate underground aqueducts, called puquios, to access this hidden water. Some of those aqueducts are still functioning today. Think about that for a moment. Infrastructure built 2,000 years ago is still moving water beneath the Peruvian desert right now. Tonight, while you rest, the water is still flowing. The Nazca were not primitive. They were exquisitely adapted to a brutal environment. They understood groundwater. They understood irrigation. They understood ceramic technology well enough to create pottery so refined that archaeologists can trace the evolution of their artistic style across centuries through the curvature of a painted line, the shift in a color palette. Early Nazca pottery is naturalistic: animals, plants, faces with wide open eyes. Later Nazca pottery becomes more abstract, more complex, more cosmological. As if the culture, over generations, was turning its attention away from the ground and toward something else. Toward the sky. Toward the invisible. Toward whatever it was that looked down on the lines they were drawing. The wind moves across the plateau at night. It carries nothing. It says nothing. But it moves, the way time moves, constantly, without hurry, erasing nothing, because there is nothing here to erase. The first serious scientific study of the Nazca Lines was conducted by a German mathematician named Maria Reich. She arrived in Peru in 1932, initially as a governess, and then as a translator, and then, almost by accident, as the person who would dedicate her entire life to the lines on the plateau. She met the archaeologist Paul Kosok in 1941, and together they began the first systematic mapping of the geoglyphs. Reich would eventually spend decades sleeping near the plateau, measuring lines by hand, protecting the figures from being driven over by trucks and motorcycles that passed thoughtlessly through the area. She paid guards out of her own pocket. She wrote letters to the government for decades, begging for protection. She was largely ignored, until suddenly she was not. In the 1960s, the lines became internationally famous. And with fame came theories. Wild ones. Erich von Daniken, a Swiss author, published a book in 1968 called Chariots of the Gods. In it he proposed, among many other things, that the Nazca Lines were landing strips for alien spacecraft. The book sold 40 million copies. The theory was, and remains, entirely without evidence. But it took hold, the way satisfying stories always take hold, because it answered the question neatly. The lines were for someone who could see them from above. Therefore, something came from above. Maria Reich spent years, politely, firmly, and with increasing exhaustion, explaining why this was wrong. She pointed out that the lines are not flat runways. They are shallow surface scrapes, a few inches deep at most. Any landing craft heavy enough to require a runway would sink through the gravel and go nowhere. She pointed out that many of the lines are not straight enough or long enough for any meaningful landing approach. She pointed out that the figures, the hummingbird, the spider, the monkey, serve no aeronautical purpose whatsoever. A spider does not help a spacecraft land. None of this mattered to the people who wanted the alien theory to be true. It still does not matter. You can find the alien theory presented as fact on dozens of websites right now, tonight, while you lie here. The desert does not argue. The lines do not defend themselves. They simply remain patient, present, waiting for a better question than who built them, waiting for the deeper question, which is why, and what were they asking for? The question of purpose has driven researchers for nearly a century. And the honest answer, the one that science has slowly and carefully assembled, is more interesting than any alien landing strip. It is more interesting because it tells us something not about visitors from elsewhere, but about the people who lived here. About what they needed, about what they feared, about what they hoped a greater power might be willing to give them. Maria Reich, in her later years, became convinced that the lines were astronomical. She believed they were a giant calendar aligned with the rising and setting points of stars and constellations that mattered to the Nazca people. She spent decades measuring angles, checking alignments, cross-referencing the positions of lines against the movements of celestial bodies. Some of her alignments held up, others did not. The astronomer Gerald Hawkins, who had previously analyzed Stonehenge, applied computer analysis to the Nazca Lines in the 1960s. His conclusion, after rigorous statistical testing, was that the astronomical alignments were no greater than chance. That the lines pointed in many directions, and if you look hard enough at anything, you can find a star somewhere that rises or sets along a given bearing. Reich disputed this. The debate continued and continues still. There is something quietly moving about two people, both devoted to understanding the same desert, looking at the same lines, and seeing entirely different things. Science is often like that. Not a clean march toward truth, but a conversation, sometimes heated, sometimes tender, between people who care deeply about getting it right. Your own life is a little like that too. The questions you carry about your own past, about why things happen the way they did, often resist easy answers. And sometimes the act of asking carefully, persistently, with humility, matters as much as the answer itself. The wind breathes across the plateau. The Quechua-speaking peoples of the Andes, who are cultural descendants of many pre-Columbian traditions, have a concept called the dark cloud constellations. Where Western astronomy sees shapes in the stars, patterns formed by points of light, Andean astronomy sees shapes in the dark patches, the dust clouds, that interrupt the brightness of the Milky Way. The dark llama, the dark fox, the dark serpent. These dark shapes are not emptiness to be ignored. They are figures as significant as any constellation mapped by Greek or Mesopotamian astronomers. They are a different way of reading the same sky. And when you look at the Nazca geoglyphs, the monkey, the hummingbird, the condor, the spider, and look up at the night sky above the plateau, some researchers have noted a correspondence. Not a one-to-one map, not a precise star chart, but a family resemblance, as if the people who made the lines were drawing on the ground what they saw above. as if the plateau were a mirror held up to the sky, as if they were saying, "We see you, and we are here." The gravel holds the warmth of the day, long after dark. If you pressed your palm flat against it, you would feel the stored heat rising slowly into your skin. That warmth belongs to the same sun that warmed the hands of the people who scraped these lines. That connection is real, not metaphor. The same sun, the same physics of stone and heat and time. Your body right now is obeying the same rules that governed every body that ever lay down on this earth. The calcium in your bones came from ancient seabeds, laid down hundreds of millions of years before the Nazca drew a single line. You carry the deep past in you, always. Even here, even tonight, even in this drowsy half-dark between waking and sleep. Rest. The lines are patient. They have been waiting 2,000 years. They can wait a little longer. Let the warmth of the plateau and the warmth of wherever you are lying now become the same warmths. Let the stars above the desert and whatever is above you now become the same sky. You are not so far from that plateau. Not really. Not when you measure in the currency that the Nazca people measured in. Not in bone and breath and need. Not in the desire to be seen by something larger than yourself. We will go deeper into the mystery as the night continues. Into the water rituals. Into the archaeology of the plateau floor. Into what the spider might actually mean. But for now, let the quiet of the desert come to you. Let it settle. The way gravel settles. The way dust settles. After 2,000 years of stillness, the night deepens over the plateau. Stars cross above the pale lines, and 2,000 years of silence settle back like dust that has fallen and will not be moved again until morning. The plateau keeps its secrets the way all old things keep secrets. Not through concealment, through patience. Through the simple accumulation of time laid down in layers, the way sediment lays itself down, the way the body stores old pain quietly beneath the surface, unreachable until someone looks closely enough. The archaeologists who have looked closely have found things. Small things. Things that do not make the headlines the way alien spacecraft theories make the headlines, but things that matter far more. Begin with the lines themselves. There are not just a few of them. There are thousands. Researchers using satellite imagery and LiDAR scanning, a technology that fires laser pulses from low-flying aircraft and measures precisely how those pulses bounce back from the surface of the Earth, have now identified over 2,000 individual geoglyphs in the greater Nazca region. 2,000. The famous figures, the hummingbird, the spider, the monkey with its spiraling tail, the condor, the whale, the tree, are a small fraction of what is there. Most of the geoglyphs are not figures at all. Most of them are lines, plain straight lines running in every direction, some of them stretching for miles without a single curve. And trapezoids. Long flat trapezoids, broad at one end, narrowing toward the other, like the open mouths of rivers, like the shadow of a doorway cast very long across a stone floor at dusk. These trapezoids troubled researchers for years. They are too wide to be paths. They point in too many directions to be purely astronomical. They seem almost ceremonial, as if they were made to be walked, as if large groups of people were meant to process along them in sustained ritual movement. And here is where the evidence becomes interesting. Because the surface of the plateau, when examined carefully, when each stone is turned and noted and catalogued, tells a story of footsteps. Hundreds of thousands of footsteps. The lines and trapezoids show evidence of repeated human traffic. Stones displaced along their edges, the way the edge of a path gets worn when feet scuff across it thousands of times, across hundreds of years. The lines were walked, not just drawn and then admired from above. They were walked over and over by people moving in procession, by people carrying offerings, by people who knew every inch of these pale scratches in the gravel with their own feet. The smell of dust rises when your feet disturb old gravel. That same thin mineral smell, chalk and iron and ancient stone, would have risen with every step these people took. Now look at what was found along the edges of these lines. Pottery, broken pottery, not whole vessels carefully placed as if on a shelf. Fragments, shards, as if the pots were smashed deliberately in a specific place at a specific moment. In many ritual traditions around the world, the breaking of a vessel is a sacred act. It releases the contents. It marks the end of a ceremony. It is an offering through destruction, a gift given by the act of giving up. The shards along the Nazca Lines are consistent with this pattern. They cluster at certain points along the trapezoids, near the wide ends, near what might be gathering points, near what might be entrances to the sacred. And among the shards, something else. Shells. Seashells. Spondylus shells from the Pacific coast, and sometimes from as far away as Ecuador, hundreds of miles to the north. The spondylus shell, sometimes called the thorny oyster, was one of the most sacred objects in the ancient Andean world. It was associated with water, with rain, with the sea, with the forces that brought water from the sky to the parched earth below. In a culture where rain was rare and water meant survival, the spondylus was more valuable than gold. It was traded across thousands of miles of mountain and desert and coastline. It appeared in the most important ritual contexts, in burial sites, in temple offerings, in the hands of the powerful dead. And it was left in fragments, along the pale lines scratched into the dry plateau, along with something else, something that tells us with uncomfortable clarity how serious this was, how desperate the need had become. Human remains, not formal burials, scattered bones, evidence of what archaeologists carefully describe as ritual deposits. The Nazca are known from their pottery art and their burials to have practiced the taking and keeping of trophy heads. Severed human heads with holes drilled through the forehead for carrying cords. Heads that appear in their painted pottery held aloft, worn as ornaments, displayed in ceremony. Heads offered to something unseen. This is not comfortable history. It is not meant to be. The people who walked these lines were not gentle children of nature smiling peacefully at the sky. They were people under enormous pressure. People living in a desert that could kill them and sometimes did. People who watched the sky every day for signs of rain that almost never came. People who needed something to work, and they were willing to offer the most precious thing they knew: life itself. The silence after that thought has weight. Let it sit for a moment. Let the desert have its due. Because those people were not so different from the part of you that has ever wanted something badly enough to give up something real. To make a sacrifice. To show with your body and your behavior that you are serious. The psychology is the same. Across 2,000 years. Across the distance between your body right now and the pale floor of that plateau. Consider what Lady AR has revealed beyond the lines themselves. When the laser pulses sweep across the plateau, they detect not only the lines and figures, but something beneath them. Traces of structures. The faint outlines of platforms, of cleared ceremonial areas, of ancient pathways that predate the geoglyphs themselves. The plateau was not a blank canvas when the Nazca began drawing. It was already used, already sacred, already a place where people came to do important things. The geoglyphs were laid over an existing sacred landscape, the way a new temple is sometimes built over an older one. Not erasing what came before, deepening it, adding to a conversation that was already thousands of years old. When archaeologists excavate carefully along the edges of the trapezoids, they find not just sherds and shells. They find evidence of fire, lashi, charcoal, the remnants of burning. Things were burned here. Offerings consumed by fire, transforming from the solid world into smoke, rising. Smoke that could be seen from the sky. Smoke that rose upward toward the forces being addressed. A signal. We are here. We are doing this. Please notice. The burning would have been visible for miles. In a flat landscape with no trees to obstruct the view, a column of smoke rising from a ritual burning would have been a landmark. A beacon, drawing people toward the ceremony, orienting them across the featureless plain. The lines and the smoke working together. permanent marks in the ground and temporary marks in the air. The same message, written in two different languages. One for now, one for always. The Nazca Plateau sits above one of the most remarkable underground water systems in the pre-Columbian Americas. The Puquios. These are spiral-topped wells connected to underground channels that tap the natural water table below the gravel surface. From above, a Puquio looks like a large funnel, a spiral depression in the earth narrowing as it descends, leading down to a covered channel cut through rock that carries water horizontally, sometimes for miles. There are 36 known Puquios in the Nazca Valley system. They are still in use today. Farmers draw water from channels that Nazca engineers cut through living rock 2,000 years ago. The engineering requires a precise gradient, shallow enough that water flows gently, steep enough that it moves at all. The Nazca engineers got it right 2,000 years ago. With a cord and a stick and an accumulated understanding of how water behaves that must have taken generations to perfect. Now look at the Puquio openings from above. Their funnel tops are spiral-shaped. Spirals. The same spiral that appears in Nazca pottery over and over. The same spiral that forms the monkey and a pose, S-tail. The same spiral that appears in the geoglyphs on the plateau. The spiral was not just a decorative element. It was a map of a real thing. The shape of a well. The shape of water entering the earth. Researcher Rosa Lassapanara of the Italian National Research Council led a team analyzing satellite imagery of the plateau in 2016. Her team found that a significant number of the lines point toward or terminate at known Puquio locations, or at places where the underground water table comes closest to the surface. The lines may have been in part a map of the hidden water system below. A way of saying in a landscape with no trees and no hills, this is where the water is. Walk this line. It will lead you to life. The same calcium that stiffened the bones of those ancient engineers is in your teeth right now. The same need to find water, to understand where it comes from, to protect it, is in you. In a different form, but the same form. A stone turns in the night wind. A small sound in a vast silence. The plateau breathes. Now here is the theory. The one that has emerged slowly and carefully from decades of patient evidence gathering. The one that most researchers in the field now accept, with some variation, as the most plausible framework for understanding what the Nazca Lines actually were. The Nazca Lines were water, not a map of water, not a prayer for water written in stone. They were water in the way that a cathedral is prayer made physical. They were the ritual infrastructure of a water religion. Think of it this way. Imagine you live in a place where meaningful rain has not fallen in 3 years. Your underground aqueducts are still flowing, but slowly. The crops are thin. The children are quiet in a way that frightens you. You have watched the mountains to the east every dawn for signs of cloud. You know, as your parents knew, that the water that feeds your rivers comes ultimately from the sky, from the rain that falls on the high peaks, from the snowmelt that trickles down invisible through miles of rock and stone before emerging in your valley. The sky is the source, not poetically, literally. So you build your religion facing upward. You build it on the premise that there are forces above that control the water, that can be asked, that can be persuaded, that can be shown how serious you are. The wide trapezoids are gathering spaces. Ritual plazas made not of stone walls, but of pale lines, visible from the sky, because the sky is who they are for. The straight lines radiate outward from sacred hills called huacas. In Andean cosmology, certain places in the landscape hold spiritual power. Springs, hilltops, places where water emerges from the earth. The lines connect these sacred points. They create a web, a network of ritual relationship between the places where water lives and the sky where water begins its journey. The figures, the hummingbird, the spider, the monkey are offerings, drawn large enough to be seen by the forces above, that the Nazca people needed to notice them. The hummingbird in many Andean traditions is associated with rain and the coming of water. Drawing a hummingbird the size of several city blocks in the dust of the driest place on earth is not primitive. It is a desperate and magnificent act of faith. It is a prayer the size of a neighborhood. It is someone saying to the sky, "We see you, we know your shape, we honor your form, please come." The spider has been identified by entomologists as belonging to the genus Rhisinulae, a genus of tiny arachnid found exclusively in humid tropical forests, not in deserts. The male Rhisinulae spider carries its reproductive organ on its third leg. The spider in the Nazca Lines has an unusually detailed third leg, as if whoever drew it had studied the creature closely, as if whoever drew it knew. The spider is a symbol of fertility, of the wet world they needed, drawn on the ground of the dry world they had. The Nazca were also master weavers. Their textiles preserved in the dry desert air show the same imagery as the geoglyphs. The hummingbird appears on textiles. The condor appears on textiles. The fox and the snake and the spider all appear. Textiles were among the most important ritual objects in the Andean world. They were offered to the dead. They were burned as sacrifices. They were wrapped around sacred bundles. The same figures that had power when woven in thread may have had even greater power when woven into the land itself. Scale as amplification, larger message, louder prayer. The water theory also helps explain something that initially seems puzzling. The Nazca Lines are not all the same age. They were made and remade and added to across at least 600 years of continuous use. Some lines were scratched over older lines. Some figures overlap with earlier figures. Some trapezoids were widened, extended, modified. This is not the behavior of a culture that built one thing for one purpose and then left it alone. This is maintenance. This is a living ritual system, being tended, being updated, being renewed with each generation and oppose specific needs and specific crises. A drought in one generation might prompt the enlargement of an existing figure. A flood in another might prompt the construction of a new line in a new direction. A political alliance between two valley communities might prompt the connecting of two previously separate ceremonial areas, with a new straight line cutting across the plateau. The lines were not a monument built once and admired forever. They were a document, a living record of what was asked for, and when, and by whom. We do not have the key to read that document fully. We may never have it, but we can see the handwriting. We can see that many hands contributed. We can see that each generation added its own voice to the conversation. The conversation that began in the silence of the desert and ended only when the people themselves ended. Or rather, did not end. Because the Quechua-speaking peoples of the Andes are still here. They are the cultural heirs of these traditions. Their relationship with the sacred landscape, their understanding of water as a spiritual force, their ritual relationship with mountains and springs continues. The conversation was not abandoned. It changed form. It adapted, as human things do, as human things always have. Your own breath right now is part of a water cycle. The moisture you exhale drifts into the atmosphere. It will join clouds. It may fall somewhere as rain. You are already in the conversation. You have always been in the conversation. The night air carries this thought out across the plateau, out into the dark, out toward the mountains where the water begins. But here is where the story gets honest. Because science is honest when it is doing its job well, and the honest truth is this: the water theory is compelling. It is supported by significant and accumulating evidence. But it is not complete. There are things it does not fully explain. Things that sit at the edges of the theory, like shadows at the edges of a fire, refusing to be fully lit. The monkey figure at Nazca is one of the largest, with a body over 300 feet long and a tail that spirals in an enormous coil. Monkeys do not live in coastal Peru. They live in the Amazon, on the other side of the Andes, a world away in terms of terrain and climate and everything. The Amazon to the ancient Nazca would have been almost mythological. The wet world, the impossible green place, the place where water fell from the sky every day. The archaeoastronomer Anthony Aveni at Colgate University spent years surveying the Nazca Lines with teams, walking them on foot, recording every angle, every terminus, every intersection. He found that many of the lines do align with certain astronomical events, not precisely enough to constitute a working calendar, but enough to suggest that the sky mattered in ways beyond just rain. The lines may have served multiple purposes. This is frustrating to those who want a single clean answer. It is satisfying to those who know how humans actually work. Humans rarely do one thing for one reason. A cathedral is a place of worship and a community gathering space and a civic landmark and an expression of collective pride, all at once. The Nazca Lines are likely the same. Ceremonial and astronomical and navigational and artistic and political. All of these things woven together, the way Nazca textiles were woven, so completely integrated that you cannot pull one thread free without unraveling the rest. In 2004, a team from Yamagata University in Japan began a systematic survey of the Nazca Plateau and surrounding regions. Led by researcher Masato Sakai, the team applied LiDAR analysis and careful on-the-ground survey work. Over 2 decades, they identified over 1,000 new geoglyphs, in addition to the roughly 200 already known. Many of these new figures are smaller, cruder, found on the slopes of hills and the edges of the plateau. And they are older. The geoglyph tradition did not arrive fully formed. It grew. It started small, perhaps personal, perhaps local. One community marking one hill. One family honoring one spring. And then, over generations, it expanded. It became regional. It became monumental. And around 600 CE, roughly 1,500 years ago, the major geoglyph construction appears to have stopped. Around the same time, the Nazca culture itself begins to show signs of severe stress. The pottery changes and the settlements shift. Some are abandoned. Paleoecological studies, analysis of ancient pollen preserved in sediment layers, have revealed that the Nazca Valley was once forested. Specifically a tree called the huarango. The huarango is drought-resistant and deep-rooted, capable of surviving in the same dry conditions that define coastal Peru. Its roots go down sometimes 50 feet or more, tapping underground water that no other plant can reach. It stabilizes the soil. It prevents erosion. Remove the huarango, and the desert becomes more desert. The Nazca cut down their huarango trees out of need. They needed land for agriculture. They needed wood for cooking fires and construction. Over centuries of slow deforestation, they removed the very system that had made their valley livable. And then a catastrophic El Niño event around 500 CE. Violent floods that tore through the valleys, stripping topsoil, filling the Puquio channels with debris, destroying the delicate irrigation infrastructure that generations had built. Without the Huarango roots to hold the soil, the floods took everything. The Nazca had been praying to the sky for water, and the sky finally sent water. All at once, more than anything could survive. The lines remained. The lines always remained, because there was nothing left to disturb them. There is one final layer of the mystery that deserves its own moment. The question that comes up whenever anyone looks at the Nazca Lines seriously. The question that is dismissed too quickly in the rush to explain everything with water and astronomy and ritual. Did it work? Not in the supernatural sense. Not whether the gods came down and watered the crops in response to the hummingbird prayer, but in the human sense. Did the ritual system, the lines, the processions, the broken pots, the offering of shells, the burning, did it work for the people who practiced it? The answer, which archaeology cannot give cleanly, but which human psychology can approach, is almost certainly yes. Not because the rain came when they asked, but because the doing of it, the walking of the lines, the shared ceremony, the collective act of asking together, created something real. It created community. It created a shared purpose in the face of crisis. It created the psychological conditions for resilience. When your crops are failing and your children are thin and you cannot control the sky, the act of doing something, anything, together with your community is not nothing. It is everything. It is the thing that keeps the group from fragmenting, from turning on each other, from surrendering to despair. The ceremony says, we are still here. We are still together. We are still asking. And as long as we are asking together, we have not given up. Your body knows this. When you are overwhelmed, when the thing you face is too large for one person to carry, the act of reaching toward other people, towards something larger than yourself, is not weakness. It is the most ancient human technology there is. More ancient than the pottery. More ancient than the aqueducts. More ancient than the lines themselves. The technology of shared meaning, of collective ritual, of saying out loud, together, in the dust of a desert or the quiet of a midnight room, we are still here and we are still trying. Rest now. The plateau is breathing in the dark. The lines are patient. And tomorrow, the story continues. The stars are very high tonight over the plateau. The air is still. And somewhere between those two truths, the lines are waiting. Pale in the dark. Patient as they have always been. Still asking. Carry that question with you into sleep. Someone drew a bird the size of a city block. They could not see it, but they believed with everything in them that someone could. And they kept drawing. And the drawing is still there. Picture this. Dawn has not yet broken over the plateau. The sky to the east is a deep bruised color, not black anymore, not blue yet, but something between, the color of a stone that has been in cold water. The stars are still out. Not all of them. The brightest ones, the ones the Nazca people knew by name, the ones they tracked through the seasons with the same attention you might give a calendar, are still sharp and clear above the plateau. A person wakes. We do not know their name. We do not know if they were a man or a woman, a priest or a farmer, old or young. We know only what the archaeology tells us, that they lived here, that they worked on something enormous, that they carried water in ceramic vessels so beautiful that 2,000 years later, people still stop to look at them in museums. Before our person rises on this particular morning, let us hold that moment a little longer. The moment between sleep and waking. The moment when the body is still heavy with dreams and the world has not yet made its demands. Researchers who study sleep know that this threshold, this hypnagogic state, is associated with unusual mental clarity. Ideas come in that space. Connections form. The filtering mechanisms of the waking mind are still offline. And what arrives in that loose open state can feel like something given rather than something made. Many cultures across human history have treated this threshold, this edge of sleep, as sacred. As a place where the ordinary world and the other world briefly overlap. We do not know what the Nazca believed about dreaming. They left no written record. But their pottery, painted in the hours before dawn, and their textiles, woven with figures that move between natural and supernatural, suggest a culture deeply attentive to the permeable boundaries between worlds, between living and dead, between surface and underground, between the visible plateau and the invisible sky. You are in that space right now, that threshold, between the world that asks things of you and the world that simply holds you. Let the holding be enough for tonight. Let the plateau extend beneath you, flat and warm and patient. The settlement our person wakes in sits in a river valley, not on the plateau itself. The plateau is not where people lived. It is where people went to do the important things. The settlements clung to the edges of the river valleys in the narrow bands of irrigable land where the underground water could be brought to the surface, where the soil was not just pale gravel, but dark and workable. The walk to the plateau from the valley took maybe an hour. Up a gentle slope, from the green, narrow corridor of the valley into the wide, pale emptiness above. That transition must have felt like entering a different world. From the intimate scale of the valley, with its walls and its shade and its sound of water moving in channels, to the enormous flatness of the plateau, where there are no walls, no shade, no sound except wind. The body registers that transition. The skin registers it. Something in the chest registers it. An opening, a slight breathlessness, the feeling of being exposed to something very large. That feeling is not unpleasant. That feeling is part of why people go to sacred places. Not comfort, expansion. The sense that you are smaller than you usually feel, and that the smallness is not threatening, but freeing. They wake on a mat of woven totora reed. Totora is a papyrus-like plant that grows along the margins of the underground-fed wetlands in the lower valley. Dried and woven, it makes a surface soft enough to sleep on, firm enough to get up from. The mat smells faintly of the wetland where it came from. Green and faintly muddy. A smell of water in a place where water is rare. They lie still for a moment. Eyes open. Listening. This is the first thing you do when you wake in a quiet place. You listen before you move, before the body requires anything of you. You just listen. What they hear is wind. The plateau wind that comes before dawn, not the hot afternoon wind that scours the surface, but the cooler night wind that has been moving across the flat land since midnight. It makes almost no sound, but you feel it on your face and on the back of your hands, cool and constant and indifferent. Outside the structure where they sleep there are sounds. A dog somewhere shifting position. The low sound of someone already awake, moving, perhaps tending a fire. The smell of smoke reaches them before they rise. Smoke, and beneath it, the smell of maize being ground. Dry stone against dry grain. A sound and a smell so deeply encoded in the body that even the memory of it, 2,000 years later, in a different body, in a different place, in the dark where you are now, carries something in it. The smell of food being prepared. The smell of morning. The smell of someone who loves you, already awake, already doing the work. They rise. The floor beneath their feet is hard-packed earth, cool and firm. Outside the doorway, the sky has moved. More bruised now. More purple at the horizon where the Andes begins. They walk to the edge of the settlement and wash their face in water carried from the Puquio. The water is cold. Cold enough to make you sharp. Cold enough to move the body from sleep into wakefulness in the way that only cold water can. You know this feeling. Your body knows this feeling. Cold water on your face in the dark before the day has officially begun. The small gasp. The clarity that follows. They eat a small amount. Maize prepared simply. Perhaps with dried peppers. Perhaps with quinoa, which is having something of a resurgence in your own era, 2,000 years after the people who first cultivated it were drawing birds in the desert. They eat and do not speak much. The way people who work together closely sometimes do not need to speak. The sun rises. It is very sudden here at this latitude, in this dry air. There is almost no twilight. One moment the horizon is dark, and the next the sun is there, enormous and immediate, flooding the plateau with a warm orange light that makes everything look like it is made of copper. The pale, scraped lines glow. For a few minutes just after sunrise, before the light goes white and harsh and relentless, the lines are beautiful. They catch the low-angle light. They stand out against the dark, varnished surface of the plateau, white and clear and deliberate. And for those few minutes, in the copper light of early morning, you can almost see what they saw. Standing at ground level, watching the light move across what you have made, knowing it goes somewhere above you, knowing something up there is looking. The light shifts, goes white. The lines fade back into the general paleness. The day begins in earnest. The work is not glamorous. It is never glamorous. The building of the lines required the removal of the dark surface stones and their careful placement in long, neat piles along the edges of the cleared areas. Those stone piles are still there, still sitting along the margins of the figures, exactly where the Nazca people placed them. The piles are low and neat. They are not heaped carelessly. They are arranged with attention that tells you something about the people who made them. Even the discarded material was handled with care. Even the stones that were simply in the way were placed with intention. This is what craftsmanship looks like at scale. Not just the finished thing, but the way the excess is handled. The tools were simple. Wooden stakes driven into the ground at intervals. Cords stretched between the stakes to create straight lines. The cord is everything. The cord is what makes a perfectly straight line possible across the uneven surface of a desert plateau, without any instrument more sophisticated than a taut length of plant fiber. Miles of perfectly straight lines are created with a stick and a string. The geometry is not magic. It is simple and brilliant and utterly human. You stretch a cord from point A to point B. You scratch along the cord. You move the cord forward. You scratch again. One section at a time. One day and a pose's work at a time. For decades. For generations. The children of the people who began a figure completing what their parents started. The grandchildren of those children maintaining what their grandparents built. Walking the lines. Removing stones that had rolled back onto the cleared surface. Rescraping sections where wind had deposited new gravel. Keeping the message legible. Keeping the prayer visible. The ceramics the Nazca made are worth dwelling on, because they tell us something about the people that the lines cannot. Something about their interior life. Something about what they found beautiful. Nazca pottery is polychrome. It uses up to 13 different colors in a single vessel. 13. Each color derived from a different mineral or plant source. each requiring its own preparation process, each needing to be applied before firing in exactly the right thickness, or the color will shift in the kiln. The knowledge required to produce 13-color polychrome pottery is not casual knowledge. It is the knowledge of specialists, of people who spent their entire lives understanding clay and heat and pigment, who passed that knowledge on as carefully as any other inheritance. The figures on the pottery, the same figures that appear on the plateau, are rendered with a fluency that suggests total familiarity. The hummingbird on a ceramic vessel is not a careful copy of a remembered image. It is drawn the way you write your own name, without thinking, with the automatic grace of something done 10,000 times. This is what craft looks like after generations. Not effort, fluency. The same fluency you might have in your own most practiced skill. The way your hands know how to do the thing before your mind has caught up. The children of the Nazca grew up surrounded by these images. The figures were not exotic. They were wallpaper. They were the visual language of every day. The hummingbird and the spider and the condor were as familiar as any face. They appeared on the vessels that held food and water, on the cloth that covered the body, on the walls of the structures, on the floor of the plateau above the valley. The sacred was not kept separate from the ordinary. The sacred was inside the ordinary, woven through it, the way warmth is woven through a body. Inseparable, not noticed until it is gone. The afternoon rest on the edge of the trapezoid stretches. Someone is telling a story. We cannot hear it, but we can see from the faces of the listeners that it is a good story. A story about water, or about an ancestor who found water, or about the time the river ran so full it overflowed the valley walls, or about the mountain spirit that controls the snowmelt. Stories that teach the landscape. Stories that encode the knowledge of where water is and why, and what to do to honor the forces that move it. Stories that are the portable version of the lines. The lines you carry inside you. The ones no flood can wash away. In the middle of the morning, when the sun is already fierce, a group of workers rests. They sit along the edge of a cleared trapezoid. They drink from ceramic vessels. The water is warm by now. Warm and slightly mineral, the taste of the underground, the taste of the Puquio. They drink it anyway. Warm water in a desert is still water. Warm water in a desert is still life. Someone is weaving, even in a rest break. The fingers moving through the pattern without conscious thought, the way experienced hands always move. A child is present. Small, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sitting close to an adult, watching the weaving with complete attention. The child will learn this. They will learn the textile vocabulary and the geoglyph vocabulary and the ritual vocabulary, all from watching, all from proximity to adults who are doing. This is how culture passes. Not in books, not in classrooms, in proximity, in watching, in doing beside someone who already knows. Your own knowledge of how to be human came the same way. Someone showed you. Someone let you watch. The child watching the weaver on the edge of the plateau 2,000 years ago is not so different from you learning anything you know how to do. The afternoon wind rises. It crosses the plateau from the east, carrying fine red dust. The workers feel it on their skin. Grit in the teeth. They do not stop working. The wind is always there. You do not wait for the wind to stop. You work in the wind. You do what needs doing in the conditions that exist, not in the conditions you would prefer. The Nazca did not have good conditions. They had these conditions: heat, wind, drought, and they built something beautiful. Not despite those conditions. Inside them, the way all beauty is made. Inside difficulty. It is a day no different from other days at first. The workers are on the plateau. The sun is high. The wind is doing what the wind does. And then someone stops. They have stopped because of the sky, not because of something in the sky, because of the quality of the sky. It has changed, not dramatically, not yet, but there is something different about the light. A slight haze at the horizon to the east. The mountains, usually sharp-edged and absolute in the dry air, are slightly softened. A person who has lived here all their life knows what this means. They know it the way you know the smell of rain before the rain arrives. From the light, from the way the mountains look, from the way the wind is beginning to change direction. Something is happening in the high Andes. Something wet is moving down from the peaks. They watch. All of them. Work has stopped. No one said to stop. But everyone has stopped. Because this is the thing. This is what all the walking and all the breaking of pots and all the careful placement of shells and all the years of moving stones in the desert heat was asking for. The light thickens, not dark, not threatening, just different. The temperature drops, not much, a few degrees. But on skin that has been in the desert sun all day, a few degrees is enormous. You can feel it everywhere at once. Someone makes a sound. Not words, just a sound. The kind of sound that a body makes when something it has been waiting for begins to arrive. There is a smell now. Very faint, almost not there, but there, the smell of water in the air. To someone who lives in the Nazca Valley, this smell is so rare, so associated with everything that matters, that it is almost unbearable. It is the smell of the answer, the smell of the prayer being received, the smell of the sky saying, "Yes, I hear you. I am coming." The oldest person in the group, a woman who carries her age in her posture and her hands, closes her eyes. She is remembering something. Perhaps the last real rain. Perhaps the last time the rivers ran full. She opens her eyes. She says something to the group. We cannot hear what she says, but the group responds. They move onto the center of the trapeze. They stand in the cleared space. They face the direction the smell is coming from. They are standing inside a prayer they did not invent. They are standing inside a prayer their great-grandparents began. Let us follow this moment forward. The smell of rain on the horizon. The group standing in the cleared space. The woman speaking. What happens next, in the days after a rain event in the Nazca Valley, is documented not just in the abstract, but in the physical evidence. Because after rain, the puquios run faster. The underground channels fill with increased pressure from above. The flow in the surface channels accelerates. The fields that have been waiting receive water. Seeds that have been lying dormant in the hard earth, sometimes for months, sometimes for more than a year, crack open. The root is the first thing. Always the root first. Reaching down before anything reaches up. Making sure the foundation is there before committing to the light. Within weeks of a good rain event, the narrow green corridor of the valley floor intensifies. New growth everywhere. The smell of it is extraordinary. Green and sharp and almost overwhelming after months of dust and mineral and dry air. The smell of things becoming. The workers on the plateau would have watched this. From their high vantage above the valley, they would have seen the valley floor change color. From pale and thin to dense and green. And they would have known, whatever they believed about the mechanism, that the asking had been part of the answer. That the lines and the ceremonies and the broken pottery and the shells and the walking and the years of faithful maintenance had been worth doing. Not because the lines made it rain, but because the lines made them ready, made them the kind of people who could hold together through years of drought, made them the kind of community that did not fracture under pressure, made them the kind of culture that, facing extinction, chose to make something beautiful. That is the lesson the Nazca Lines teach. Not that prayer controls the weather. Not that ritual has supernatural power. But that the sustained, embodied, communal act of reaching towards something larger than yourself is what keeps a people alive. Not the answer. The asking. The asking is the thing. The asking is the structure that holds everything else up. You feel this in your own life. When you have asked for something genuinely from the deepest part of you, even if the answer never came, there was something in the asking itself. A clarification, a commitment, an acknowledgement that you needed something, and that needing was not weakness. The Nazca people understood this. They built their understanding into the earth. They wrote it in the only alphabet available to them. Stone and light and the vast legibility of scale. Read from above. Read by whatever looks down. Read by us 2,000 years later, still trying to understand what they were saying. And understanding more than we perhaps expected. More than any alien theory could give us. Because the alien theory makes them foreign, removes them from the family, says they needed help from outside the human. But they did not. They were completely human, completely capable, completely doing what humans do when the world becomes too difficult to face alone. They reached toward each other. They reached toward the sky. They kept reaching. For 600 years. They kept reaching. The sky does what the sky does. It is indifferent to our names for it. But the asking, the sustained communal, embodied act of asking, that was not nothing. That was never nothing. That is the oldest technology humans have. And it is still in you. Right now. In the dark where you are lying. The capacity to ask. To reach. To believe that something above you, or around you, or deeper in the world than you can currently see, might be listening. The clouds build over the Andes. The air on the plateau smells of what might be coming. The group stands in the cleared space. The pale lines glow in the changing light. And the sky keeps moving. The way skies always do. Towards something. Always towards something. Rest now. Let the wind cross the plateau. Let the smell of distant rain reach you through 2,000 years, through the dry air, through the dark. You are a descendant of people who stood in cleared spaces and asked. That asking is in your blood. It has always been in your blood. Let it be there tonight. Let it be enough. The lines are pale in the moonlight. The sky is enormous. And somewhere above all of it, something is moving. The Nazca Valley today. 2,000 years after the first line was scratched into the pale gravel. The plateau is still there. The lines are still there. The condor still stretches its wings across the pale surface, 440 feet from tip to tip, waiting for an eye high enough to see it whole. But the world around the plateau has changed. And in the way it has changed, there is a mirror. A reflection of everything the Nazca Lines were drawing attention to. Everything they feared. Start with the water. The Nazca Valley today is experiencing water stress that would have been recognizable to the people who scratched those lines. The aquifers that fed the Puquioos for 2 millennia are dropping. Not because the Puquio engineering has failed. The channels are still sound. They drop because the water table itself is falling. Because the glaciers in the Andes, the ones that feed the rivers that recharge the underground water system, are shrinking. The Cuellar ice cap, the largest tropical ice cap on Earth, located in the high Andes of southern Peru, has lost roughly 40% of its surface area since 1980. 40% in less than 50 years. The glaciologist Lonnie Thompson of Ohio State University has been measuring the Cuellar since the 1970s. He has drilled ice cores from its surface and read in them a climate record stretching back 1,500 years. And in those cores, he found a pronounced dry period in the chemistry of the ancient ice, occurring right around 500 to 600 CE. Right when the Nazca culture collapsed. Right when the floods came. Right when the Huarango forests were already gone and there was nothing left to hold the soil. The ice core confirmed what the archaeology had suggested. The Nazca were caught between a changing climate above them and a degraded ecosystem beneath them. Two forces pressing from both directions. Let us look at one specific parallel more closely, because it is the kind of parallel that the people making the decisions in both eras could not easily see. The Nazca deforestation did not happen overnight. No one woke up one morning and said, "Today we will destroy the ecosystem that sustains us." It happened in increments. One field cleared. One tree cut for firewood. One more row of crops pushed a little further into the hillside. Each individual decision was rational. Each individual decision responded to a real, immediate need. The family needed the field. The family needed the firewood. The community needed the food. No single decision was wrong. The pattern of decisions was fatal. Paleoecologist David Beresford Jones of Cambridge University has studied the deforestation of the Nazca Valley in detail. He and his colleagues analyzed pollen sequences from ancient sediments, reading the vegetation history of the valley layer by layer. What they found was a curve, a slow curve of decline. The Huarango pollen, abundant in the deepest layers, begins to decrease gradually around 2,000 years ago, coinciding with the intensification of Nazca agriculture and settlement. The curve declines slowly at first, then faster, then steeply, and then around 500 to 600 CE, it essentially disappears. The Huarango is gone from the pollen record. The ecosystem protection is gone. The soil has nothing holding it. And then the El Nino floods come, and the soil goes with them. Beresford Jones called this, in a 2009 paper, a classic case of a society undermining the ecological foundations of its own existence. He was not describing the Nazca as foolish. He was describing them as human, doing what humans do, optimizing for the near term, failing to see the cumulative curve, trusting that what has worked before will continue to work, right up until the moment it stops working. The Quelquia Glacier is following a similar curve. Not identical. The causes are different. The scale is different. The speed is different. But the shape of the curve is familiar. A slow decline. Accelerating decline. The point at which the system that has been quietly absorbing the pressure can no longer absorb it. And then something gives. The Nazca Lines were not the cause of the problem. They were the response to it. The communal attempt to address through ritual what could not be addressed through technology. And there is something in that worth holding. Not as a model for solving climate problems, but as a model for how communities face what they cannot control. With shared ceremony, with collective acknowledgement, with the physical act of showing up together in the place that matters and doing something with your body that says, "We are here, we understand, we are trying." That capacity is not outdated. That capacity is the one thing technology has not replaced, and perhaps cannot. The Huarango trees are coming back. Slowly. Reforestation projects in the Nazca Valley today are replanting the same deep-rooted, drought-resistant trees that the ancient Nazca cleared. It will take generations. A Huarango tree does not reach its full depth in a human lifetime. But the planting has begun. Someone is planting trees today in the Nazca Valley that their grandchildren will depend on. This is the same logic as the lines. Build something today for an audience you will never meet. Do the work in the conditions that exist. Trust that the thing you are building, even if you cannot see it whole, is worth building. Both acts are prayers. Both acts are addressed to the future. We are still here. We are still trying. We have not given up. Your body right now carries this same impulse toward continuation. The calcium in your bones was once part of the ocean floor. The iron in your blood was forged in a star that died before our sun existed. You are a temporary arrangement of ancient materials passing through. And what you do while passing through matters. The wind moves across the plateau tonight. It has been moving since before the lines existed. But right now, it is also moving across you. The same air, the same planet, the same slow turning. Here is something your body knows that your mind sometimes forgets. You were not built for the world you live in. Not exactly. Your body was built over millions of years of gradual refinement, for a world of irregular food and physical exertion and social groups of roughly 150 people, and darkness at night and stars. Your nervous system was exquisitely calibrated for threats that were physical and immediate and resolvable, for rewards that were concrete and sensory and present. Food, warmth, the presence of other bodies, the sound of familiar voices. The Nazca person walking the plateau, working in the sun, eating with community, doing physical work with visible results under an open sky. That person and a pose's nervous system was in its correct environment, completely calibrated. You are the same body. In the 2,000 years since the Nazca walked their lines, human biology has not meaningfully changed. Your nervous system is still running the same ancient software. But the world you live in has changed faster than evolution can follow. A body built for darkness at night is being bathed in artificial light until midnight. A nervous system built for threats that pass is being fed a continuous stream of threats that never resolve. A social brain built for groups of 150 is being asked to maintain awareness of thousands of faces simultaneously. You are not broken. Let that settle. You are not broken. You are a perfectly functional organism, living in conditions that outpaced your biology. There is a specific neurological phenomenon worth naming here, because it connects the Nazca walker on the plateau to you in the dark right now in a way that is not metaphorical. When human beings engage in repetitive rhythmic physical activity, walking, rocking, drumming, weaving, the brain does something interesting. The default mode network, the part of the brain associated with self-referential thinking, with worry, with the running internal monologue that most of us live inside. It quiets. Not completely, but measurably. The activity of walking along a line, placing one foot in front of the other in a known direction toward a known destination, with other bodies around you doing the same. That activity does something to the nervous system that sitting with your thoughts cannot do. It produces what neuroscientists call transient hypofrontality, a temporary reduction in prefrontal cortex activity, the part of the brain that plans, worries, judges, runs scenarios, calculates risk. When that part quiets, even partially, the experience is one of relief, of presence, of the body and the moment being enough. The Nazca people who walked their lines in procession were not just performing ritual. They were producing a specific neurological state, a state of collective calm, of shared presence, of the worry mind giving way to the walking bodies. This state is not mystical. It is biological. It is what the body does when you give it what it was built for. Movement, community, purpose, direction, the open sky. You do not need a 2,000-year-old plateau to access this. You have the same hardware, the same ancient pathways, The same nervous system that responds to rhythm and movement and shared purpose. Even here, even lying still, there is a version of this available to you, in the rhythm of your own breathings, in the slow movement of air across your skin, in the quiet repetition of attending to the story, to the dark, to the small weight of your own body resting. The default mode network is already quieting. The worry mind is already stepping back. The body is already doing what it was built to do when it is finally allowed to rest. The plateau is in you. The lines are in you, not as history, as biology, as the same ancient architecture, responding to the same ancient inputs. Darkness, a stillness, the sensation of being held by something larger. Rest, the stress had a ritual container, a form, a set of actions that translated the fear into movement. That is what ritual does. That is what the lines did. They gave the fear somewhere to go. They gave the anxiety a shape it could scratch into the pale earth. Your body still needs this. A distraction takes you away from the fear. A ritual takes you through it. The Nazca walked through the fear. Together, on the pale lines, in the relentless sun, for 600 years. The stars above the plateau are the same stars that were above it 2,000 years ago. The same ancient light arriving now into your eyes. If your eyes were open, let them rest. The light will still be there. The Nazca culture ended. Let us not pretend otherwise. The floods came. The soil washed away. The infrastructure failed. The line drawing stopped. The specific constellation of beliefs and practices and imagery that we call Nazca dissolved back into the broader Andean world. And yet something survived. Something always survives. The Andean relationship with sacred landscape did not end with the Nazca. It continued through the Wari Empire, which incorporated elements of Nazca iconography into its own visual language. Through the Tiwanaku culture to the south, through the countless smaller communities who maintained their own versions of the same essential understanding. That the landscape is alive. That water is sacred. That the relationship between the human community and the natural world must be actively tended. The Inca Empire, which rose roughly 800 years after the Nazca collapse, built an entire civilization on this same understanding. The Inca sect system divided the Andean world into lines radiating out from the sacred center of Cusco. Lines radiating outward from a sacred center toward the horizons, connecting sacred points in the landscape. The same logic, the same geometry. 2,000 years later, the idea did not die with the Nazca. It traveled. It adapted. As the things that matter always do. The Quechua people of the Andes today still practice forms of offering to the Pachamama. Still burn offerings at sacred sites. Still honor the mountains with the understanding that they are participants. That the relationship matters. The resilience of the Andean tradition is not only cultural, it is also physical. The landscape itself survived. The plateau survived. The Puquio channels survived. The underground water system that the Nazca engineers cut through rock 2,000 years ago survived everything. The flooding, the collapse, the centuries of abandonment, the Spanish conquest, the centuries of colonialism, the 20th century. The channels are still there, still moving water, still doing what they were built to do. There is something almost impossibly moving about this. An act of engineering performed 2,000 years ago by people whose names we will never know, in a culture whose language we cannot read, is still performing its function today. Still making life possible in that valley. Still moving the ancient water through the ancient stone. The engineers who cut those channels did not know their names would be forgotten. Perhaps they did not care. Perhaps the point was never the name. The point was the water. The point was the thing working. The point was the next generation having what they needed. This is the deepest form of the act we have been tracing through this story. Not the lines, not the ceremony, not even the art, but the quiet, unglamorous work of making something that functions, something that serves the people who come after, something that keeps working even when you are gone. That is the legacy of the Nazca that will outlast every theory about what the lines mean. The channels, the water, the ongoing quiet miracle of water moving through stone. 2,000 years of service, with no fanfare, no monument, no UNESCO designation, just the water, moving, as it was built to move, as it will continue to move, long after everything else is argued over and debated and photographed from helicopters and written about in papers that nobody reads. The water moves, and that is enough. That has always been enough. This is resilience, not the absence of collapse. The ability to carry forward what matters through the collapse. The Nazca lost their fields and their cities, but the understanding they had built traveled forward. It is still traveling. In you. Not because you know anything about the Nazca, but because you are a human being. And the understanding that we must pay attention to the world that sustains us is not a Nazca idea. It is the oldest human idea. We look at the lines today and ask, why couldn't and oppose till they see what was happening? And the answer is the same answer that future generations will have about us. They could not see the full system. They could not see the cumulative effect of 10,000 individual reasonable decisions adding up to an unreasonable outcome. This is the most human failure. Myopia. The inability to see at the scale that matters when you are living at the scale of a single life. The lines were the attempt to think at scale, to address something larger than one season, to build something that outlasted one generation. They were not enough, but they were the attempt. And the attempt is what we honor. The sustained, faithful communal attempt. To keep going even when you cannot see the whole picture. Especially when you cannot see the whole picture. You carry this capacity in the same body that carried it for the Nazca. The same nervous system. The same ancient social brain that knows that the large things require community. That the large things require sustained attention across generations. That the large things require the willingness to draw the line. To scratch the pale surface. To say this is what I understood. This is what I was asking for. This is the shape of my hope. The plateau is dark now. The stars are out. The lines are invisible in the dark, but they are there. They are always there. Patient and pale and permanent. And the sky above them is enormous. And you are part of the long line of people who have stood beneath it, who have looked up, who have asked, who have kept going. Rest now. You have earned the rest. The lines are still there. They will be there when you wake. They have been waiting 2,000 years. They can wait for morning. Pull back now. Pull back from the plateau. Pull back from the valley, from the Puquios, from the reforestation projects, from the ice cores and the satellite images and the arguments about what the spider means. Pull back further. Pull back until the plateau is a pale rectangle in a pale desert on the western edge of a continent, on a turning sphere moving through the dark. Pull back until the 2,000 years we have been tracing becomes a single thin layer. A geological instant. A breath. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. If you compressed that entire span into a single calendar year, a year that begins on the 1st of January and ends at midnight on the 31st of December. Human beings in any recognizable form would not appear until the 23rd of December. The Nazca people would not appear until the final seconds of the 31st. The lines they drew would be scratched into the earth in the last fraction of the last second of the last minute of the last hour of the year. And you are here in that same fraction, in the same last breath, lying in the dark, listening. In the context of deep time, the distance between you and the Nazca person walking the plateau is nothing. You are neighbors. You are practically the same moment, the same thin layer of geology, the same brief flowering of a particular kind of consciousness on a particular kind of planet in a particular corner of a galaxy that contains 200 billion stars in a universe that contains 2 trillion galaxies. A 2 trillion. The number is not comprehensible. It is not meant to be comprehensible. It is meant to do something else. It is meant to release you from the weight of the particular, from the heaviness of your specific worries, your specific losses, your specific fears about the future. Not because those things do not matter. They matter enormously. To you, to the people you love, to the small warm circle of your actual life. But when you place them inside the frame of deep time, something shifts. The weight does not disappear, but it becomes proportionate. The same way that looking up at a clear night sky can make your problems feel briefly smaller, without making them feel unimportant. The stars do not diminish your life. They contextualize it. They say you are small, and this is also fine, and the smallness is not a failing. It is simply the condition. The condition of being a briefly living thing on a briefly living world, in the middle of something so enormous that even the people who dedicate their lives to measuring it cannot quite hold it all in their minds at once. The astronomer Carl Sagan once described the Earth as a pale blue dot. He was describing a photograph taken by the Voyager 1 spacecraft in 1990. From a distance of roughly 6 billion kilometers, the entire Earth, every mountain and ocean and city and battlefield, appears as a single pixel. A mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Sagan wrote about that image with a feeling the Nazca people would have recognized. Not despair, something closer to wonder, and something closer still to responsibility. He said, "Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves." The Nazca drew lines asking for help from elsewhere. Perhaps they were wrong about the source. Perhaps the help they needed could only come from within. From within the community. From within the accumulated wisdom of the culture. From within the relationships they maintained with each other and with the landscape. The Nazca Lines, the Puquio channels, the reforestation projects, the stories told in the dark. These are all forms of help that come from within. From the accumulated intelligence of people who have lived somewhere long enough to understand it. Who have paid attention long enough to read the landscape. Who have cared enough to pass that reading forward. The pale blue dot does not wait to be saved. The pale blue dot saves itself. Over and over. In small acts. Performed by temporary arrangements of ancient atoms. Who care briefly and completely about the world they pass through. The plateau below you is one of those acts, the oldest ongoing act of human attention, in one of the driest places on Earth, still legible after 2,000 years, still asking, still answering, still here. Your body was assembled from material that has been cycling through the Earth for billions of years. The carbon in your cells was once part of ancient seabeds, ancient forests, ancient bodies of creatures whose names have no names because they existed before language. The water in your blood fell as rain millions of times onto surfaces that no human eye ever saw. The calcium in your bones was once dissolved in ancient oceans, was once part of a coral reef, was once part of a shell on the floor of a sea that no longer exists. You are not new. You are a new arrangement of very old things. You are the universe looking at itself through a particular set of eyes for a particular span of time. And when those eyes close, the material does not disappear. It continues. It cycles. It becomes part of something else. Something that will also eventually look up at the sky and feel the same ancient wondering. The same reaching toward the large. The Nazca Lines will eventually disappear. Not soon. Not in any timescale that matters to you or me. But eventually, the desert itself will change. The gravel will shift. The pale surface will darken again as new desert varnish forms slowly over millennia. The lines will fade back into the surface, but the asking will not disappear. The asking is not in the lines. The asking is in the biology, in the part of the human nervous system that looks up and wonders and reaches and draws. That part is not going anywhere. As long as there are human beings, there will be people who look at the sky and feel something and try to answer that feeling with the tools available to them. With lines in the earth, or stories in the dark, or mathematics on a page, or a song, or a hand extended toward another person in the middle of the night. The form changes. The reaching does not. The plateau breathes in the dark. 2 trillion galaxies turn above it. And on the surface of one small planet, one very temporary arrangement of ancient atoms is resting. Listening. Still here. Consider the chain. The unbroken chain of survival that connects you to every living thing that has ever existed on this planet. Start with you. You are alive tonight. You are breathing, which means that at some point in the recent past, you were fed. You were kept warm. You were protected from the things that could have killed you when you were too young to protect yourself. Someone did that. Whatever complicated relationship you may have with the people who raised you, they kept you alive long enough for you to be here now, to be listening to this, to be breathing in the dark. And those people were kept alive by someone too. And those people by someone before them. And so on, back through every generation, back through every ancestor, back through the Nazca people walking their lines, and the people before the Nazca who walked other lines in other deserts, and the people before them who crossed the land bridge into the Americas, back through the first humans, back through the hominids that preceded humans, back through the primates, back through the early mammals that survived the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs, back through the fish that crawled onto land, back through the first life. That unbroken chain of survival is 4 billion years long. 4 billion years. And it has never once been broken. Not once. In 4 billion years of predators and ice ages, and asteroid impacts, and volcanic eruptions, and droughts, and floods, and plagues, and wars, and famines. The chain held. Every single one of your ancestors survived long enough to reproduce. Every single one. The particular arrangement of atoms that is you could only have come from this exact chain. This exact sequence of survivals. This exact line of people and creatures and organisms, each one making it through, each one passing the torch forward. So you, here, tonight, in the dark, breathing, the statistical improbability of your existence is genuinely incomprehensible. Mathematician Ali Binazia attempted to calculate it once. He arrived at a number, 1 in 10 to the power of 2,700,000. A number with 2,700,000 zeros after it. The universe itself, as far as we know, only contains around 10 to the power of 80 atoms. Your existence is vastly more improbable than the existence of the universe. This is not meant to make you feel special in a self-congratulatory way. It is meant to make you feel the weight of what it means to be here. There is a field of study called epigenetics that has revealed something remarkable in recent decades. The experiences of your ancestors, their traumas, their adaptations, their hard-won responses to the specific challenges they faced. These are not only passed down culturally, they are passed down biologically, in the chemical markers on your DNA, in the way certain genes are expressed or silenced, in the specific configuration of your nervous system, which was shaped not only by your own life, but by the lives of everyone who came before you. The Nazca person who spent decades walking the lines in drought and heat and faith. The stress of that experience, the resilience that experience built, the specific neurological adaptations that sustained a community through crisis, left marks, not in the gravel only, in the bodies of their descendants. Those descendants are still in Peru today, still carrying in their biology the accumulated adaptations of people who survived the driest place on Earth. You carry your own version of this. Whatever your ancestors endured, Whatever they survived. The biological echo of their survival is in you, in your specific nervous system, in your specific stress response, in the specific way your body has learned to handle difficulty. You did not choose this inheritance. None of us choose our inheritances, but we carry them. And on the nights when the body feels too old or too tired or too much, it is worth remembering that this body has been carrying things for a very long time. Longer than one lifetime. Longer than 1 century. The exhaustion you feel tonight, if you feel exhaustion, is not only yours. It is also the exhaustion of everyone who came before you, who also got tired, who also lay down in the dark, who also needed to rest before they could keep going, and rested, and kept going, and passed you forward as a gift, an improbable, hard-won 4 billion-year gift that is breathing in the dark right now, receiving this story, resting, as all gifts eventually must, before they give again. The Nazca person who walked the lines, who woke on the reed mat and washed their face in cold water. Their existence was equally improbable. Every person who has ever lived in every era, in every corner of this planet, was equally improbable. Every one of them arrived at the end of an unbroken 4 billion-year chain of survival. Every one of them was the universe looking at itself through a particular set of eyes. And every one of them, in their own way, tried to make sense of being here. Some drew lines in the desert. Some wrote poems. Some built temples. Some raised children. Some planted trees they would never see fully grown. Some cut channels through rock so that water could flow 2,000 years after them. Some told stories in the dark. And you, right now, you are doing something with your existence tonight. You are resting. You are allowing your body to do the thing it was built to do when the day is done, and the demands are quiet, and the dark comes in. You are resting in the company of an old story. And the old story is saying what all old stories say. You are not alone. You have never been alone. The chain behind you stretches back 4 billion years. 4 billion years of company. 4 billion years of something passing the torch forward. So you, on this particular night, in this particular dark, with this particular body, that has never existed before, and will never exist again. Exactly like this. The lines say that. Every line ever drawn by any human hand says that. You are the inheritor of every line ever drawn. Rest in that inheritance tonight. It is vast. It is warm. It is enough. The plateau is very quiet now. The last light is long gone. The air has cooled to the temperature it keeps through the small hours. That narrow, cold band between midnight and dawn, where the world pauses, where even the wind pauses, where the stars seem closer, where the dark has a quality that the dark at other hours does not have. A completeness, a fullness. The dark of 3 in the morning is a different dark from the dark of 10 at night. 10 at night is still holding the day. 3 in the morning has let it go. Everything the day asked of you is behind you now. Everything the next day will ask of you is still ahead. And here in this pause, in this gap between the asking, there is only this: the breath, the dark, the small weight of your body resting. The pale lines of the Nazca Plateau, 2,000 years old, 7,000 miles away, holding their shape in the desert night. You have traveled a long way tonight. From the first pale scratch in the gravel to the last. From the earliest question to this one, which is not a question at all. It is simply the acknowledgement of being here. Still here, after everything. Still breathing. Still part of the 4 billion-year chain. Still the universe looking at itself through a particular set of eyes. Eyes that are growing heavy now. Good. Let them grow heavy. Let the story settle into you the way the heat of the desert settles into gravel at the end of a long day. Slowly, from the surface down, the warmth moving inward, the story moving from the mind into the body, from the body into the breaths, from the breath into the dark. The Nazca people told each other stories by firelight. Because the human need for narrative, for the shape of events, for meaning made from sequence, is as old as any other human need. As old as hunger. As old as the need for warmth. Stories are how we carry each other across time. The story you have been listening to tonight was carried here by 2,000 years of asking. By every researcher who walked the plateau in the heat. By Maria Reich paying guards out of her own pocket. By Lonnie Thompson drilling ice cores in the Andes. By the Quechua communities who kept their relationship with the sacred landscape alive through 500 years of change and loss and survival. By the ancient engineers who cut the Puquio channels. By the potters who painted the hummingbird 10,000 times. By the person who scratched the first line into the pale gravel with a stick and a cord and a belief that something above was watching. All of that carried forward. To here, to you, to this dark room, to this specific moment of rest. The people who made this channel, who gathered these stories, who spent time in the research and the writing and the care of making something that might carry another person through a long night. They are grateful you are here. Not in a transactional way. Not in the way of someone who needs something from you. In the way of someone who made a thing and hoped it would reach someone who needed it. And finds, again and again, that it does. That people in the dark, in their specific loneliness and their specific tiredness and their specific longing for something larger than the day they just survived. Find their way here. The way the Nazca people found their way to the plateau. By a path they did not entirely choose. Towards something they could not entirely name. But something that felt right. Something that felt like the correct direction. If you have found your way here on difficult nights, if this has been one of the places where the dark is a little less heavy, then the channel is working the way a channel is supposed to work. The way the Puquios work. Moving something necessary from where it begins to where it is needed. Quietly. Underground. Without fanfare. Just the water. Moving. That is all any of us can do. Move something necessary. From where it is to where it is needed. With the tools we have. In the conditions that exist. For the people we will never meet. Who will drink from what we built. Long after we are gone. There are people who have listened to this story before you. In different rooms. In different cities. Under different skies. Some of them are asleep now. Some of them found what they were looking for in the lines, in the spider, in the desperate, beautiful faith of a people who drew enormous birds in a desert for an audience they could not see. Some of them simply rested. Which is enough. Which is always enough. The plateau will be there in the morning. The condor will be there. The hummingbird. The spider with its careful third leg. The monkey with its impossible spiral. The pale lines running toward the horizon. Running toward the mountains where the water begins. Running toward the sky that the Nazca people spent 6 centuries addressing. Are still there. Are still asking. Or perhaps no longer asking. Perhaps after 2,000 years of waiting, they are simply being. The way the desert is simply being. The way the stars are simply being. Without demand. Without expectation. Just present. Just pale. Just there. The way you are simply being now. In the dark. In the quiet. In the pause between the asking and the answer. This is the oldest human place. This pause. This rest. This willingness to lie down in the middle of the enormous mystery and let it hold you. Rest well. You are a descendant of survivors. Every single one of your ancestors made it through. Through drought and flood and ice and fire and every dark night that ever came before this one. They made it through. And they passed the torch to you. And tomorrow the story continues. The lines are still there. The sky is still enormous. And somewhere above the pale plateau of the Pampa Colorado, something is still looking down. Something that has always been looking. Something that sees the condor, and the hummingbird, and the spider, and the monkey with its spiral tail. And you, here, in the dark, are still here, are still breathing, are still part of the chain. Asleep now. The asking is done for tonight. The lines are holding, and the desert is warm, and the stars are very close, and you are not alone. You have never been alone. Rest.